The call came in at 6:47 on a Thursday morning, and I remember the exact time because I'd been staring at the clock on the microwave, watching the minutes tick by, telling myself I had exactly 40 minutes before I needed to leave for the courthouse. My name is Abigail Tran, and I'm a structural engineer. I specialize in bridge assessment, which sounds boring until a bridge starts failing, and then suddenly everyone wants to know your name. I'd been with my fiancé, Nathan, for 4 years. We met at a mutual friend's New Year's party in Ottawa. The kind of party where everyone's a little too loud and a little too cold because someone left the back door open. He found me standing near the radiator, holding a glass of wine I wasn't really drinking, and he said, "You look like someone who'd rather be reading." I told him he was right. He said that was the most interesting thing anyone had said to him all night. I fell for him the way you fall for things when you're 29 and you've started to believe that maybe the life you wanted isn't coming. Slowly, then all at once. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, on a camping trip near Algonquin Park, in the rain, with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I cried. He cried. A loon called out somewhere across the water like it was punctuating the moment. Our wedding wasn't a big production. We'd both agreed we didn't want that. We wanted something small and real, just immediate family, a few close friends, and a civil ceremony at the Ottawa courthouse. We'd have dinner after at a restaurant in the Byward Market we both loved. The kind of place with mismatched chairs and wine served in juice glasses and food that always made you feel like someone's grandmother had made it just for you. My best friend, Simone, had been part of my life since our second year at Carleton University. We'd met in a structural mechanics course where neither of us understood what was happening for the first 3 weeks. We'd started studying together out of desperation and ended up inseparable. She was the maid of honor at what was supposed to be my wedding. She'd helped me pick out the dress. She'd sat with me at my kitchen table in February, cutting addresses off an old Christmas card list to figure out who to invite. I trusted her the way you trust someone when you've watched each other grow up through your 20s. Completely. Without checking. The call at 6:47 was from my supervisor, Douglas. His voice had that particular flatness it gets when something is genuinely wrong, not just complicated. "Abby," he said. "The Carleton overpass. I need you to go look at something right now." The Carleton Avenue overpass is a pedestrian bridge in Ottawa. It's not large, not face, but it crosses a busy road, and on a Thursday morning, people use it to walk to work, to school, to the O train station. Douglas had received a report from a city inspector the evening before about stress fractures in the primary support beam. The kind of fractures that, under the right load conditions, could be catastrophic. He'd flagged it to be looked at that morning before the city's rush hour traffic peaked. He needed my eyes on it because I'd done the last assessment on that bridge 2 years earlier. "Douglas," I said, "today is my wedding day." There was a pause. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. But if this beam goes and people are on that bridge," I didn't let him finish. I already knew what I was going to do. That's the thing about being an engineer. You don't get to choose whether a structure is safe. It either is or it isn't. And if it isn't, everything else waits. I called Nathan immediately. His phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I sent a text. Emergency at work. Bridge assessment. People at risk. I'll be there as soon as I can. Please call me back. I love you. I got dressed in my work clothes. Steel-toed boots, sight vest, hard hat in the bag, and I left my wedding dress hanging on the back of the bathroom door. The overpass was worse than Douglas had described. The fracture pattern in the primary beam wasn't just stress. It showed signs of accelerated corrosion beneath the surface coating, the kind you don't catch until you're standing right underneath it with a flashlight and a pit forming in your stomach. I called the city's transportation office at 7:20 and told them the bridge needed to be closed immediately, before morning rush. They pushed back. I told them I would put my professional designation on the line and sign the closure order myself if they needed someone to take responsibility. They closed it at 7:41. I stood there in the cold for another hour, documenting everything, taking samples, making notes, coordinating with the city inspector who'd arrived on site. My phone was buzzing in my pocket, and I couldn't look at it. Every time I tried to step away, something else needed my attention. A question from the inspector, a call from the city's engineering office, a request to confirm measurements before the closure barriers went up. By the time I was in a cab heading to the courthouse, it was 10:23. Our ceremony had been scheduled for 10. I kept trying Nathan's phone. Voicemail every time. I tried Simone. She didn't pick up either. When I walked through the doors of the courthouse at 10:31, my heart was already doing something irregular. I knew I was late. I knew Nathan was probably furious. I'd already rehearsed what I was going to say, how I was going to explain it, how I'd reach for his hand and ask him to understand. What I was not prepared for was finding a small gathering of people in the civil ceremony waiting area, and in the middle of it, Nathan standing next to Simone, and both of them holding papers. Simone was wearing a cream-colored dress I'd never seen before. She looked like a bride. I stopped walking. I couldn't move. My brain was doing the thing where it receives information but refuses to process it, where it keeps searching for an alternate explanation like it's a software program running a debug and finding nothing. Nathan's mother, Lorraine, spotted me first. She was a thin woman with precise posture and a talent for making you feel like a problem she'd already solved. She turned toward me with an expression that wasn't surprise. It was something else, something closer to satisfaction. "Abigail," she said, "you're too late." "What does that mean?" I said. It didn't come out as a question. It came out flat, like something had gone out of my voice. "The ceremony is done," she said. Nathan and Simone were married 20 minutes ago. The room did not spin. That's what people say. They say the room spun. For me, everything just went very still and very sharp, the way the world looks right after a car accident when you're checking yourself for damage and your body hasn't started hurting yet. Nathan was looking at me. He didn't look guilty. He looked, and this is the part I've thought about 100 times since, he looked relieved, like something he'd been worried about was finally over. "You knew," I said. I wasn't asking. He said, "You were 3 hours late. Abby, I was 31 minutes late. I texted you." "You didn't call. I called twice. You didn't answer." He looked away from me. That was the moment I understood that the calls going to voicemail hadn't been a coincidence. Simone hadn't moved from where she was standing. She was looking at a point somewhere to the left of my face, the way people look when they know they've done something they can't defend, and they've already decided not to try. I looked at her dress again. It was fitted at the waist. It had a small pearl button at the collar. Someone had tailored it. You don't get a dress tailored for a morning you didn't plan. I said very quietly, "How long?" She didn't answer. Nathan's mother stepped forward like she intended to physically move me toward the exit. "I think you should go, Abigail. There's nothing here for you anymore." I looked at her. I looked at Simone. I looked at Nathan. Then I turned and I walked out. I went to a Tim Hortons 3 blocks away and sat at a corner table for 45 minutes. I didn't order anything. No one asked me to leave. I sat there in my work clothes with my hard hat bag between my feet, and I looked at the steam coming off a cup someone had abandoned on the table across from me, and I thought about the fact that the worst thing that had ever happened to me had happened on a Thursday morning while I was doing my job. My mother called while I was sitting there, my aunt, my cousin. Apparently the friends who'd been there had started texting people, By the time I finally left the Tim Hortons and got into another cab, my phone had 17 unread messages and I'd read exactly 0 of them. There's a particular kind of grief that comes from betrayal. It's not like losing someone to death or distance or circumstance. It's the retroactive grief, the kind where you don't just lose the future you'd imagined, you lose your memory of the past. Every good thing you thought you'd shared gets a question mark put behind it. Every conversation, every trip, every quiet evening. You start going back through everything looking for the lie, and the terrible part is that you find it, again and again, in places you never thought to look. I found out later, much later, from a friend who worked at the same firm where Nathan was a junior partner, that he'd been struggling financially for nearly 2 years. He'd made a series of bad investments in the years before we met, and when we moved in together, 18 months into our relationship, he'd begun, very slowly and very carefully, redirecting shared expenses through our joint account in ways that were technically legal but fundamentally dishonest. Small amounts. Nothing dramatic enough to notice if you trusted the person doing it. I trusted him. I hadn't looked. The amount, when someone eventually added it up for me, was just over $19,000. That's not a fortune, but mine. I'd also co-signed the lease on the condo we lived in together. His name was on the utility accounts. Small things. The kind of domestic entanglement that accumulates naturally when you live with someone and assume you're building something together. Simone had been with him, in the other sense, for somewhere between 8 and 14 months. I got different numbers from different people, and I stopped trying to pin it down after a while. It didn't change the shape of what had happened. What I did know, from my own lawyer, a woman named Patricia Lau, who came referred by a colleague and who had the calm, precise manner of someone who had heard every version of every story and was no longer surprised by any of them, was that my position was actually cleaner than I'd feared. I was not listed on any of Nathan's investment accounts. The joint account had only been open for 11 months, and I had documentation of every deposit I'd made. Patricia sent a formal letter to Nathan's lawyer within 10 days of the ceremony, outlining the claim on the redirected funds and requesting a return of same. He paid. Not immediately, not without some back and forth, but within 6 weeks the full amount was back in my account. Simone called me once, about 3 weeks after. I let it go to voicemail and I never listened to the message. I don't think there's anything she could have said that would have been worth hearing, and I didn't want her voice living in my phone. I moved out of the condo at the end of the month into a rental apartment in Centertown that was smaller than what I was used to and smelled faintly of old carpet, and I spent the first 2 weeks there eating takeout from the Vietnamese place on the corner and reorganizing my bookshelves 3 different times because I needed to do something with my hands. My colleague Douglas sent me a card, handwritten, that said, "What you did that morning took character. This office is lucky to have you." He didn't know the full story, and I didn't need him to. That card sat on my kitchen windowsill for a long time. The overpass was assessed, retrofitted, and reopened 8 weeks later. I attended the site inspection on the day it was cleared. I stood on it and looked down at the road below and thought about the 400 and some odd people who'd crossed it the next morning without knowing that someone had made a call that kept them safe. I thought about the fact that on the worst morning of my life, I'd still made the right call. Twice. Once for the bridge and once, without knowing it, for myself. There's a version of this story where I collapse, where I spend a year in the wreckage of everything I'd built with Nathan and can't find my way out. I understand that version. I understand why it happens to people. But I was also, it turned out, angrier than I was broken. And anger, in the right amounts, is extraordinarily clarifying. I'm 34 now. I have a different apartment, a nicer one. In Hintonburg, with a bay window I sit in on weekend mornings with coffee and whatever I'm reading. I got promoted 8 months after the overpass incident. They gave me a senior assessment role. More responsibility, more travel, more of the work I actually love. I took the promotion and I negotiated harder on the salary than I ever had before, because I'd learned that assuming good faith costs you things. I heard through mutual acquaintances almost a year later that Nathan and Simone's marriage was in trouble. That's not something I take pleasure in. I want to be clear about that, but I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a moment, sitting in my bay window with my coffee going cold, when I let myself feel something uncomplicated about it. Something small and private, like finding a $20 bill in the pocket of a coat you haven't worn in a long time. What I take actual pleasure in is simpler than that. It's the bridges. It's standing under a structure I've assessed and knowing it will hold. It's the specificity of that knowledge that something invisible to most people is sound, is safe, is doing what it was built to do. I used to think my work made me too unavailable, too single-minded, too much of an engineer to be enough of a partner. I've stopped thinking that. What I know now is that the things worth building take longer than you expect and hold more than you think they will, and you cannot rush them or cut corners on the foundation and expect them to stand. I should have applied that logic to Nathan years earlier. I know that now, but I also know this. On a Thursday morning when it mattered, I made the right call. And whatever else has been true of my life since then, I have always had that.